Okay, good morning, folks. It is 10:50. Thought I had an alarm set to go off at 10:50, but let me see what happened. Well, I guess I inadvertently turned it off, but I do have one set for the end of the class session. Okay, welcome back. I hope you all didn't get any frostbite or anything while we were out that week. These kinds of cancellations, weather related mainly, but other kinds of cancellations that we've had quite a few of here at WCJC in my time here. Since I came here in fall semester of 2013, we've had quite a few cancellations, weather cancellations, probably half a dozen between floods and ice. We've had a cancellation, very long cancellation at the start of a spring semester several years ago because of a virus issue that plagued us. So I'm wondering if I'm cursed. I've cursed the college because they seem to start happening right when I came. Anyway, we've got some things to talk about here at the start of the class meeting before we get into material. How many of you have gone out to see the messages that I put out there for you on Blackboard? I hope that everyone did. So you already have some sense of how we're going to move forward. I do want to touch on a few things though, but first things first, let me do the roster real quick because we're not going to be quizzing in today's class session or in Thursday's class session for that matter. Again, if you read through that material, you know that already. But I do need to have a record of who's here. So Natalie Arana, okay. Victoria Chapman, Jacob Escobedo, Johan Fitch, Andy Garcia, Maria Garcia, Adam Garia, Everett Hutchins, Sham Khan, Maura Matamir, Alex Scobie, Christian Shaw, Corey Spencer, and Joanna Vinicotter. Okay, did I skip over anyone? Okay, just a real quick check. One other thing before I get going too far. I see that Nate, you're online. Can you hear me okay? See me okay?
I can. Thank you very much.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you're getting the feed that I think you're getting. Okay, so Nate, I need to talk specifically with my students here in the face-to-face class. If you've read over the information that I put out for you on Blackboard, the specifics are a little bit different. The general approach that we're going to take from this point forward is the same, but the specifics are a little bit different. So make sure that you're familiar with the information that I put out on Blackboard. Okay, so
Yes,
for
sir.
everybody who's here today in the face-to-face class, most of you raised your hand when I said, did you see the information? For those of you, one or two people who didn't raise their hand, what I'm talking about is on the course website. This is the homepage for the course website. I showed you that at the very beginning of the semester. And down here is a widget called My Announcements. If you click on that link, I think it looks the same for you as it does for me, right? Okay, so if you click on that, this is where all the announcements for the semester are put, where I put those. Some of them may be not active for you yet. For example, this one's not active yet because your quiz, as you know, your quizzes for week 6 are Friday and Saturday. That's the quizzing period, okay? But there are other things out here that you should have seen. For example, this is I guess the main catch-up plan document that I generated for you. Resuming the spring 2021 semester and playing catch-up. And I'm not going to read this to you. You've read it. If you haven't read it, please go out and read this document very carefully. Make sure that you're familiar with everything that I put in here. The basic plan is this. We're going to move forward. We're not going to try to go back in class time and, take, the material that we missed last week. We're not going to try to start with that and then move forward, because we'll be humping the rest of the semester, to try to get everything in if we do it that way. So I just want to pick up with the week 6 material. This is week 6. Okay. So if you were to look at the original course syllabus, what the topic was for week 6 is going to be what we're going to start with this in today's class meeting. The material that we missed for last week, it's very important material. In fact, it's really probably my personal favorite material for this course, the topic on civil liberties, where we deal with right of free speech, and we deal with right of free worship, and we deal with right of privacy and these other civil liberties rights, which in my experience, students often find very interesting as well. We're just going to have to let you go back on the schedule that's convenient to you, go back and pick that up. And again, those of you who've read the document know that I'm giving you a lot of latitude here. I'm just going to leave that open until the end of the semester. You can, as your schedule permits, you can go back and have a look at the video files that I loaded for you. What I'm talking about here, I set up this special area for you here on the website over here in the navigation pane. It says week 5. Week 5 is last week, the week that we missed. Okay, week 5 catch-up area. And I've listed some tasks here for you. Okay, and then here are some links to some video files. This is essentially the material that we would have covered in class last week. We would have tried to cover this material. I produced these videos a long time ago. Okay, when I very first started teaching online classes back in 2005, I produced these videos. Most of these videos are 2 to 3 minutes long, okay, dealing with very specific topics within this broader topic of civil liberties, okay? So again, between now and the end of the semester, or now and the end of week 15, leave final exam week 16 aside, between now and the end of week 15, you can go out here to this week 5 catch-up area, view these video files, if you need, go back and read the chapter in the textbook in preparation for the reading quiz for chapter 4, the week 5 reading quiz, which was chapter 4, and the week 5 lecture quiz, which is going to be over this material right here. And you can do that. You can do those quizzes anytime between now and the end of week 15. Okay? Yes?
I thought the Constitution and the Bill of Rights we had up until the 8th of May, and I thought that the quiz for this one had a timeline for this weekend.
Okay, so yeah, it's not for the Constitution. We took a quiz on the Constitution the week before we went on break. Okay, specifically it's chapter 4 in the textbook, which is the chapter on civil rights. You have until the 8th of May to do that. That's the end of week 15. Okay, does that make sense? And this week's material, the reading assignment for week 5 was the chapter on federalism, chapter 3. And
the exam this weekend, that we've got that's open between Friday and Saturday, what's that on?
Okay, so I'm just going to open this up for you here. Here's, if you click on, if you do this, if you click on this link right here that says week 6 quizzing area, you're not going to see anything right now in your view, because it doesn't activate until Friday and Saturday. Okay, but what I've got set up here for the reading quiz is
what topic is that on?
It's chapter 4 right here on civil liberties. You're right. I said that wrong. It's chapter 4 on federalism, and the one for week 5 is, yeah, I apologize. I've got so many things going on here. That's chapter 2 on the Constitution. My apologies. You said it right. I said it wrong.
Okay, so this weekend is the civil liberties test.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this weekend is chapter 4.
Yeah.
Okay, and also the lecture material on civil liberties.
Yeah.
And you can do that. Let's see.
Do we still need to take the week 5 reading quiz?
Let me make sure I set this up correct. Let me make sure I did this correctly. The week 5 lecture quiz is over this material here on civil liberties, and you have until May 8th to do that,
Okay,
okay?
I didn't read it that way.
Well, let me, am I saying it wrong again? Let's see here.
Yes.
Oh, no, you're right. No, again, you're right. You have until May 8th to do the lecture quiz on the Constitution and the reading quiz on the Constitution. That's chapter 2,
Yeah.
okay? This stuff that you're going to quiz on over civil liberties and over the chapter on civil liberties, chapter 4, is set up for this weekend.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I've got both this class and the Texas government class face-to-face. That's different. And then I've got the online classes and their schedule's a little bit different. It's a little bit hard for me to keep it all in straight in my mind.
Just to double check and make sure the week 5 and week 6 versus pairs have been canceled, right?
The discussion boards, yes. Yes. Yeah, I figured give you that break because I it's a lot for you to manage here as we get back into the swing of things. Not to mention the fact, if you haven't thought about it, you've got that core competency assignment that's coming due at the end of this week.
Is there any chance that we can push that back a week? Because obviously I didn't have power last week, and this week, not just this class we're covering everything, but all my other classes we're covering everything,
The core
as
competency?
well as the exams this week. So is there any chance we can push the core competency, the submission date back by a week?
Send me an email on that. I want to think about that a little bit before I commit to it. I'm not going to reject it out of hand, but I got to think about why that may be a good or maybe a bad idea. Okay, so send me an email, and then I'll post an announcement on the website.
My other classes are all doing exactly the same
Yeah.
thing. We're catching up this week as well.
Yeah, I mean, part of my instinct is to say, yeah, well, but what about the 4 weeks, before, before we shut down, right? But again, I know everybody's got a lot to manage right now. I'm still doing house repairs, so I mean, I know kind of what the burdens are for some of you. So I'm not immediately adverse to that idea. Let me just think about it for this afternoon. Let me think about it. Send me the email to remind me, because with everything else going on, I might forget to think about it. So if you send me the email, I'll remember to think about it, and I'll make a decision on that when I have a chance to weigh. And I think, there's probably good reason to think that we can do that. Okay? All right. Anything else you want to ask about? Okay. Of course, when I make a decision like that, if I do make that decision for the benefit of this class, I also like to apply it to my other classes as well. So it's not just the pros and cons as it might affect this class, it's the pros and cons as it might affect other classes. Okay. Well, if there's anything that you think of, as we move forward over the next few days, message me through the course messages system, because we want to get, I think I might have mentioned in one of those messages that I posted is, when I sit in front of a computer all day like I did yesterday, I didn't make any changes until yesterday because I wanted to make sure that the college was really going to be, back and up for business on Monday. So yesterday was a pretty packed day for me. I sat at the computer the whole day. Whenever I sit at the computer for that length of time, my aging vision starts to blur and I start making mistakes. And, I want to make sure that, particularly when I'm doing things like copying and pasting, it's easy to make a mistake. So anything that you run across that just doesn't seem quite right in those messages or that's inconsistent, let me know so I can correct it. Okay, so what we're going to do today, if there are no other questions, we want to jump ahead. I need to do this real quick for the online folks. I need to make sure that they're seeing what we still only have one. That's getting fewer people who are coming to these.
I do appreciate you putting that up there for me.
Yeah, sometimes I forget, Nathan, and I also sometimes forget to turn on the speaker, so I can't always hear you if you're trying to message me, but I do my best. I'm going to try to do my best to make sure that you can see the stuff that I'm putting on the screen for this. Okay, so tell me what you see right now. You see a slide that says Articles of Confederation?
No, sir. I just see a small window with you down in the bottom right-hand corner, and the rest is blank. Up in the top left, it says William Fegan is sharing content.
Okay, so apparently I didn't do it right. Let's try this again. Okay, now what do you see?
Articles of Confederation.
Okay, here we're good to go. All right, so what we're going to do today is deal with the topic on federalism. Now, we previously talked about federalism in conjunction with our discussion on the Constitution, but we didn't get into it in a whole lot of depth. So I'm going to go back and make a few points that I previously made just to kind of refresh everybody's memory, what we already said about federalism, and then we'll get into new stuff, more detailed stuff. This is a very important topic for us in this class this morning. You want to know how important the topic on federalism is for you guys in your education? Since the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board has determined that the state of Texas has determined that in order to get a bachelor's degree from a public college or university in the state of Texas, which I assume all of you are working towards a bachelor's degree. So in order to get that bachelor's degree, you have to take 6 hours of political science, and one of those courses has to deal with the U.S. Constitution, and the other course has to deal with the Texas Constitution, and that's what the reason that the 2305 and 2306 courses are set up the way that they are. Okay, but it's not just a course on the U.S. Constitution. It's not just a course on the Texas Constitution when we talk about 2305 and 2306. There are other parts of the curriculum that we cover. But you know what they both have in common, both the 2305 and the 2306 course? They both have a topic on federalism. Okay? For those of you who have taken Government 2306, you know that. When you took the Government 2306 course, the textbook had a chapter on federalism. If you take the 2306 course next fall or in a future semester, the textbook that you're going to use will have a chapter on federalism. The professor will organize the course so that you have a topic on federalism. We have that in the 2305 course, an entire chapter in the textbook on federalism and a whole topic on the syllabus on federalism. So you get 2 doses. That seems to me to indicate that federalism is a pretty important principle of our system of government. So I don't want to go into a lot of history, but just to refresh your memory, remember we said that the federal system was created at the Constitutional Convention largely in response to the perception that the Confederacy that was created under the Articles of Confederation just wasn't going to cut it. It was ineffectual. And so particularly those who advocated ratification of the Constitution did so because they believed that a stronger national government was in order, that it was necessary to have a stronger national government. Now, I want to be clear because a lot of times in these courses we talk about 2 main factions at the Constitutional Convention when it comes to the question of national power and state power, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And what do the textbooks tell you that the Federalists were advocates of? I'm sorry? Stronger national government, is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's typically what the textbooks say, and what we say in courses like this, that the Federalists were advocates of stronger national government. Now, I like to be clear about that point, though. You have to understand that was by the standards of 1787, not by the standards of 2021, okay? They weren't advocates of strong national government like we would think of strong national government today. What were the standards of 1787 or up to 1787? Well, the standard was the Articles of Confederation. And the point is that the national government was virtually non-existent under the Articles of Confederation. there was a Congress, right? But it was a unicameral Congress, one chamber, but there was no president and there were no courts. And the Congress had presumably some legislative power, okay? But it was extremely limited. There really wasn't much authority that Congress had under the Articles of Confederation. But what authority it did have was limited by the fact that there was no executive to carry it out. I think we made that point previously when we made the point about that was one of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. You know, no executive to execute the law renders the legislative power virtually ineffectual. And so what it ultimately amounted to was that Congress could request things from the states, but it really had no authority to enforce the states to do things like, you know, pay their fair share of the bill, right? You know, that under the Articles of Confederation, Congress could essentially request revenue from the states, but oftentimes the states just didn't comply. And so by the time we get to 1786, certainly by the time we get to 1787, there are enough political leaders who recognize that this is going to be continue to be a severe problem for the United States, that they begin to envision some other sort of arrangement, which means, you know, a stronger central government. Okay, the Anti-Federalists, of course, were against what the Federalists were for. So if the Federalists were for stronger national government, that must mean that the Anti-Federalists were opposed to it. They were essentially happy with the arrangement under the Articles of Confederation, and they wanted the Articles of Confederation to remain intact. Okay, they recognized that there were some areas that needed attention, but the basic arrangement between the central government and the states, they believe should remain the same. Okay, and that's why they opposed ratification of the Constitution. You know, in 2021, Americans typically think about the Constitution as this great document that was written by these genius, gifted statesmen who put politics above, who put the good of the country above politics and all that sort of thing. And I do believe that the framers of our Constitution were very gifted individuals, very intelligent, very gifted individuals. But it is not correct for us to think that there was no opposition to the Constitution. Apparently back in 1787, when that convention that met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, finished its work and produced this document called the Constitution of the United States, it apparently was not so obvious that it was such a wonderful document, that its provisions were so wonderful, because the Anti-Federalists were organized in opposition to the ratification. Remember, writing the Constitution is one thing, okay? Actually getting the Constitution ratified was another thing. The Federalists pretty much had their way at the convention. The document they wrote really reflected the Federalist political philosophy. By the way, one of the reasons for that is because many of the Anti-Federalist delegates to the Constitutional Convention either never reported, such as Patrick Henry. You all know the name Patrick Henry, right? Patrick Henry was a deputy or a delegate appointed from Virginia to the Constitutional Convention. He never went to Philadelphia because he, quote, smelled a rat, unquote. He had a sense of what was in store before the convention ever began. So he just didn't go. But many of the other Anti-Federalist delegates who did go to the convention at some point or another got up and walked out. And I don't know if you've ever been part of any sort of group decision-making effort, but if you are part of an effort as a group to make some decisions and reach some consensus, and you get up and leave the table, you walk out, that leaves it to those who remain to write the ticket. And that's essentially what I'm telling you happened at the convention. The Federalists ended up writing the ticket. They essentially ended up writing the Constitution. And we know that they had this preference for stronger central government. The problem for the Federalists was that whereas they might have carried the day at the convention itself, the Anti-Federalists were really in a position to block the ratification of the Constitution at the state level. There were several key states that it was in real jeopardy whether the Constitution, it was in real question whether the Constitution could be ratified at all. Massachusetts, New York, and some of the other key states. Okay? You all have heard of the Federalist Papers. Okay? The Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Most of them, the greatest number of them were written by Hamilton, and then another big chunk of them were written by Madison, and I think John Jay wrote 3 of them. There's like 98 essays, I think. Okay? They're not just essays, though. They're persuasive essays, right? And they are written to the people of New York in an effort to convince New Yorkers that the Constitution was a document worthy of ratification. Can you imagine not just feeling like you need to write one essay in defense of something, but writing how many ever it was? For some reason, the number 95 sticks out in my head. 95 essays in defense of their basic argument that the Constitution should be ratified. Again, it's very apparent to Americans today the genius of this document. Apparently, it wasn't crystal clear back in 1787, 1788. Okay? Now, many of you probably know the story of how the impasse between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was resolved, right? The political compromise that began in Massachusetts, sometimes called the Massachusetts Compromise, which was introduced by John Adams and John Hancock to delegates to the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention, assured the Anti-Federalist opponents of the Constitution, if they would just drop their opposition to the ratification of the Constitution, if they would consent to ratifying this new Constitution, they would guarantee that what would happen as the first order of business under this new Constitution?
Slavery.
No, slavery is still down the road away.
All rights.
The Bill of Rights, right? The Anti-Federalists insisted on the inclusion of a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. The Federalists opposed it, right? The Anti-Federalists wanted a Bill of Rights in the Constitution because they believed that there needed to be some arbitrary limits placed on the power of the new national government. You see, the Anti-Federalists weren't idiots. They could read. We're going to look at some of the provisions of the Constitution that are relevant as we go along this week, but they could see provisions like Article 1, Section 8, and Article 6, Clause 2, and they believed that they understood what the implications of these provisions were, that it was creating a national government that was potentially capable of wreaking havoc on the rights and liberties of citizens. They didn't like the idea that the central government had that much authority. And so they saw the Bill of Rights as a means to rein in the power of this new national government. That's why, and we made this point previously, you'll recall, that's why the First Amendment of the Constitution, remember that it comes after the Constitution is ratified, okay? You get this compromise between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that a Bill of Rights will be drafted by Congress and submitted to the states for ratification. Remember, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights begins with Congress shall make no law. Well, Congress is an organ of the national government, right? They want to place these restrictions on the power of the national government, Congress, right? And all through the Bill of Rights, you get down to the 10th Amendment, which we're going to look at as kind of the kicker that reflects the Anti-Federalist philosophy. So we'll get to that, okay? But for now, let's just say that the ratification of the Constitution was in doubt, and it only came to be because you got this political compromise between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Anybody remember what I called it? Offered by John Adams and John Hancock. the Massachusetts Compromise, it's often called. And once that happened in Massachusetts, once the stalemate was broken in Massachusetts, then you got similar sort of agreements in New York and some of the other states where there was this opposition to the ratification of the Constitution. Okay? All right, all of that, let's back up. We'll remind ourselves of one other thing here real quick. In the previous discussion of the Constitution, we said that the framers took two basic approaches to limiting the power of the national government. There are the specific denials of authority, which we find particularly in the Bill of Rights, but elsewhere in the pre-Bill of Rights Constitution. The document that was drafted by the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention in the summer of 1787, you get some of that, okay? But you really get it with the Bill of Rights, okay? This, number two, I described to you really as reflecting sort of the Madisonian approach. James Madison, who we call the father of the Constitution, was really convinced that this was one of the reasons, by the way, that Madison and Hamilton and some of the other Federalists opposed including the Bill of Rights in the Constitution is because of this. Right? Actually, let me just make this point here, a couple of things here real quick. Why did we know why the Anti-Federalists wanted the Bill of Rights. They didn't trust this new national government, right? They wanted to restrict the power of the national government, okay? Why did the Federalists oppose a Bill of Rights? The Federalists didn't want, people like Hamilton and Madison argued that there shouldn't be a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, right? I wonder why. Well, let me suggest three things to you here real quick, okay? First of all, Madison argued that it was undesirable to have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, okay? We know this because of his extensive correspondence, particularly with Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention. He was in France. He was serving as an ambassador to France at the time the Constitution was written. But as I like to say, Jefferson was intellectually present at the Constitutional Convention. There were people at the Constitutional Convention who were, followers of Jefferson and Jefferson's way of thinking, okay? Jefferson advocated including the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Madison initially opposed it. In a very famous letter to Thomas Jefferson, James Madison is explaining to Mr. Jefferson, who's in France, and remember, mail travels by sailing ship across the ocean in those days, so there's a delay of some months. He's reporting to Jefferson about the provisions of this Constitution that's drafted, and on the matter of the Bill of Rights, he argues that we don't really want a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Is that because Madison just didn't love liberty and he was opposed to letting people have as much freedom as possible? No, Madison is probably second only to Jefferson in his defense of liberty. Madison is a staunch defender of liberty. But he believed that if you begin listing specific rights in the Constitution, as a Bill of Rights does, right of free speech, right of free worship, right to peaceably assemble, right to keep and bear arms, right to counsel, all those things that we know are in the Bill of Rights. If you begin listing those things in the Constitution, he worried that it's possible that that will be interpreted to mean that those are the only rights that people have. And he wasn't interested in that sort of restricted view of liberty. He was interested in a more expansive view of liberty. Everybody understand what I'm saying? If you begin listing specific rights, is there a danger, Madison worried, that that will be understood to mean that those are the only rights that people have? Okay? Jefferson's famous answer to that is a half a loaf is better than no bread at all. Right? The famous quote from Jefferson. Jefferson was pretty good with words, right? And he just gets right to the point. Better to have half a loaf of bread than none at all, right? Worry about securing the liberties that you can now, get those into the Constitution, and worry about others later. That was kind of his response to Madison. But the Federalists also believed, particularly Alexander Hamilton, that another good argument against including a Bill of Rights in the Constitution is the fact that the national government's power under the Constitution is enumerated, right, or delegated. In other words, the theory is that the national government only has the powers that are given to it by the Constitution, no more. Again, the term is enumerated or delegated. Enumerated means you could number them, right? If you were to read the Constitution from the beginning to the end, and every time you encounter a power that's delegated to the national government, you go, oh, there's number 1, there's number 2, there's number 3, there's number 4. By the end of the process, you'd have a specific number. I don't know what that number is, okay? But that's the theory. You understand what I'm saying? So Hamilton says, since, and other Federalists say, James Wilson, for example, say that since the powers of the national government are enumerated, a Bill of Rights denying authority to the national government is at best redundant. In other words, Hamilton is saying the Constitution doesn't delegate to the national government the power to abridge the right of free speech. Nowhere in the Constitution are you going to find any language that says Congress has the power to abridge the right of free speech. So if that power is not delegated to the Congress, there's no point in having a provision that says it's denied to Congress. You see what Hamilton's argument is, other Federalists? If it's not delegated, there's no need to deny it. There's nothing in the Constitution that would allow Congress to establish a religion. Therefore, you don't need a provision in the Constitution that says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Again, it's at best redundant. But Hamilton worried that it might even be problematic. It might even cause difficulties. Okay, so that's number 2. Again, number 1, Madison says it's undesirable because if you begin listing rights, it might be interpreted to mean that those are the only rights people have. Number 2, Hamilton and the other Federalists say that the powers of the national government are enumerated or delegated, and therefore there's no need to deny those powers. Make sure everybody's clear on that one because it's not as simple or straightforward as you might, as some people might think. Want to make sure everybody's clear, okay? But number 3 is this one that you see on the screen. And again, this is sort of the Madisonian idea, the structural principles of government. So that if you spread out the power of government enough to different branches, chambers, levels, institutions, people, if you prevent one person or one institution of government from having all the power, then you can prevent tyranny. You can prevent government from arbitrarily depriving people of their rights and liberties. Okay? So last week, or previous to the freeze, we talked about bicameralism and we talked about separation of powers, and we started talking about federalism. Okay? Those are the main structural principles of the Constitution. Okay. So you'll recall that we also said, just to kind of put federalism in some context, we said that there are 2 major forms of government in the world today as it pertains to central government and regional government. Virtually every country on the map that you see on the screen has a central government and then some regional governments. The real question is, what is the relationship between the 2? So anybody remember what a unitary system means?
The regional governments just have administrative authority.
Yeah, that's right. They essentially are just administrative subunits, right? So the basic idea of a unitary system is that whatever the ultimate source of power is of the central government, we're not making a distinction here between a democratic system and an authoritarian system, because you can have unitary systems that are either authoritarian or democratic. Okay? So let's not worry about that piece of it, okay, and just focus on, okay, here's where the power is at the central government, and then the central government may delegate some functions down to regional governments. I even gave you some examples, right? UK, Japan, this should be ringing a bell, right? Saudi Arabia, okay? Those were several that I shared with you, okay? The opposite of a unitary system is a confederal system or a confederacy, and it works the exact opposite direction, that the regional governments have the power, and they may delegate some functions up to a central government, okay? Whatever authority the central government has comes from the regional governments. And again, remember that the United States, before the Constitution went into effect in 1789, so from independence in 1776 to the time that the Constitution went into effect in 1789, that's a dozen or so years, right, 13 years, okay? The United States was a confederacy under the Articles of Confederation, but as I said previously, it didn't take the Americans very long to figure out that it just wasn't a workable system. The old Soviet Union, after the collapse of communism in the early 1990s, became the Commonwealth of Independent States, and at least on paper, it's a confederacy. I don't even know if it still exists, to be honest with you. The United Nations, I think, is the best example of a current confederacy that I can give you. Most Americans would probably conclude that the United Nations is not a terribly effective world government, okay? And the main reason for that, I think it's accurate. The main reason for that is it's a confederacy. And the central organs of the United Nations, that is the Security Council and the General Assembly, they can pass resolutions. But if member nations don't want to comply, they simply don't comply. Kind of like the United States under the Articles of Confederation. And here's a big piece. Historically, since the United Nations was established, anybody know when that was? After World War II, okay? So since the middle part of the 20th century, we're now about 70 years with the United Nations, it has been, for the most part, the United Nations is as effective as the United States wants it to be. If the United States, being such a big funder of the United Nations and, playing such an important role, there's a number of other countries that play a very important role as well. The UK, Russia, France, or some of the biggies, they have veto power, but in terms of funding, it's been primarily the United States, and of course funding is a big part of UN operations. Okay? All right. A federal system is a little bit different. A federal system, the central government doesn't get its authority from the regional governments don't get their authority from the central government. They get their authority independently from the sovereign. And of course, in a democracy, that means the people. Right? In the United States, more precisely, it means the Constitution. Both the national government and the state governments get their authority from the people, yes, but ultimately it has to be consistent with the Constitution. Because that is the expression, the Constitution is the expression of the sovereign will of the people. A few examples. India, again, I think we did this previously. We're almost through reviewing material. Nigeria, Germany is a federal system. Brazil is a federal system. Canada is a federal system, although they don't call them states in Canada, they call them provinces, but it's the same arrangement. Okay? Mexico is a federal system, and of course, the United States of America is a federal system. All right, so let's break some ground on some new ideas. I want to talk about some characteristics of a federal system, characteristics that all federal systems have in common. So we now know the United States is one of many federal systems in the world. Which did we say previously is more numerous, though, between federal and unitary? unitary is really, there's more of them, okay? Doesn't mean they're more important consequently, it just means that there happens to be more unitary systems. But there's certainly no shortage of federal systems, okay? All right, so what do all federal systems have in common? First of all, there's a constitutional division of governmental powers or responsibilities such that each level of government is autonomous in at least one sphere of action. There's a constitutional division of powers or responsibilities such that the central government is sovereign, or excuse me, the central government is autonomous in at least one sphere of action, and there's at least one sphere of action where the regional governments are autonomous. That word autonomous means that they can act under their own authority. Autonomous means the ability to make decisions for oneself. If we're talking about individuals, right? You as an adult have autonomy. You make personal decisions governing your life, right? When you're in your 20s, certainly in your 30s and above, you don't have to go ask your parents for permission. You have that autonomy to make decisions for good or bad, I suppose. I suppose younger people may, depending on how their parents approach parenting, but they may have some autonomy. I think most good parents recognize that they have to give their children a certain level of autonomy as they grow up, right? How else do they become confident in their ability to make decisions if their parents don't let them make some decisions on their own, right? But you understand what I'm saying. Like, as an individual, you have full legal authority to govern your own life, make decisions for your own life, right? So it means the same thing here when we're talking about governments. There's got to be at least one area where each level of government can act under its own authority. Now, in the United States, in the American federal system, the fact is that there are many areas of autonomy for the national government, and there are many areas of autonomy that the state governments have. By the way, the word autonomous does not mean that one can do it and the other can't. Does not mean that. That's the notion of exclusive authority. For example, some of you may know that under our Constitution, the national government has the exclusive power to coin money. The state of Texas can't coin money, can't print up money. That's an exclusive power of the national government. The state of Texas can't declare war on another country. That's an exclusive power of the national government. And there are, of course, some things that the states can do that the national government can't do as well. Autonomous could mean that they can both do it. And the most obvious example that I can give you is the power to tax, right? Both the national government can impose taxes and the state governments can impose taxes. But there are all sorts of other areas where both the national government and the state governments can act. How many of you, who can tell me, when you go to pump a gallon of gasoline in your car, what's the prevailing price out there right now? About $2.20, something like that? Yeah? How much of that is tax? Is that like the 8 1/4 that you're used to paying sales tax? It's not. Sales tax doesn't apply to gasoline. There's a special excise tax. Anybody know how much of that $2.20 or whatever the price is tax? Say again? Are you saying 29? 49? No, it's a little high. I think it's like 38, 37.8 or something like that. I could be wrong. Maybe it's gone up. I think here in Texas it's 37.8. Now, some of that is a state excise tax and some of that is a federal excise tax. That's the combined. I think federal excise tax is like 15 cents and the state is 20, whatever the rest is. But anyway, that's my example of, here's an area where both the national government and the state government can impose a tax on a specific item, gasoline, called an excise tax. But there are many, many other examples that we can point to, okay? Second, each government, national and state, central and regional, is final and supreme in its constitutionally assigned sphere. So that means that if it is an autonomous power of the national government, once the national government acts, it is final and supreme. The state governments can't overrule them or repeal it. Once the state governments act in their constitutional authority, the national government can't overrule it or repeal it. So if, for example, let's say the state of Texas, I'm gonna give you an example here that's extremely unlikely, okay? Let's say that the state of Texas state government decided to impose a personal income tax on its residents. Are any of you from out of state? Who's from out of state? Where are you from? California has a personal income tax, doesn't it? Right? In fact, most states do. Okay, Texas is one of only about 6 or 7 states that does not have a personal income tax. Okay, so let's say that Texas gets with the program and follows the lead of the other states and adopts a federal income tax. Again, I say that's very unlikely. I'm not making a prediction here. In fact, I think it's over. Texas is going to have to be dragged kicking and screaming, I think, to a personal income tax. It may happen someday, but not in the foreseeable future. Okay? But play along with me. This is a hypothetical. If the state of Texas decided to impose a personal income tax, it's not like Congress, the national government, can come along behind and say, no, we don't want Texas having an income tax. We're repealing that income tax. Because Texas has that authority, that autonomous authority, and once it acts, it's final and supreme. Okay? Now, some of you may be thinking, well, Fagan, hold on a second. I read the news enough to know that sometimes state laws do get overturned. For example, probably many days of the year, if you kept track of the record of the United States Supreme Court, or maybe the federal courts more generally, you would find some state somewhere might have one of its laws overturned by the federal courts, by the U.S. Supreme Court. Again, just by way of illustration, maybe pick one here that everybody can remember, even though it's been a while back now. In 2003, almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, the United States Supreme Court, in a landmark case called Lawrence and Garner versus Texas, struck down a Texas law that made homosexual sodomy a crime. State of Texas had a law making people of the same sex who engaged in sexual intercourse criminals. And the Supreme Court of the United States struck that down. So if that can happen, if the United States Supreme Court is an organ of the national government, am I saying that the national government, maybe Texas isn't final and supreme? Well, wait a minute, which is right? Well, as you look at the screen, do you see a clue up there? For the state of Texas, this law to be final and supreme, it must be what? It must be constitutional in its constitutionally assigned sphere. The Supreme Court saying, no, Texas doesn't have that power in the first place, right? That's not consistent with the Constitution. Specifically, it violates a right to privacy, individual right to privacy, right? So the state of Texas can't be final and supreme in a law that is outside of its constitutional authority. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Here's a very important characteristic of federal systems. Unlike unitary systems and unlike confederacies, in a federal system, both levels derive their authority from the sovereign rather than from one another. Remember, we said in the unitary system, the regional governments get whatever authority they have from the central government. In a confederacy, the central government gets whatever authority it has from the regional governments. But in a federal system, neither the states nor the states don't get their authority from the national government, and the national government doesn't get its authority from the states. They get their authority, as we now understand in our system, from the Constitution. And that is, again, the expression of the sovereign will from the people. Okay? Here's a big one. They're all big. I think I've said that with each one, right? In a federal system, both the central government and the regional governments can act directly on individual citizens. This was a major change that the Constitution brought in moving from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution and creating a federal system. It now meant that the national government can act directly on individual citizens, exactly what the Anti-Federalists feared. Now the national government can reach out and directly conscript individuals into an army rather than requesting militia from the states. See, because under the Constitution, Congress has the power to raise and support armies and navies. Now the national government can reach out after the 16th Amendment was added. Congress can reach out and tax you directly. Okay? And otherwise, impose other sorts of regulations. Okay? So this is a big one. And this is, as I say, exactly why the Anti-Federalists imposed the ratification under the Constitution. The Constitution transformed the United States, not all at one time, as we're going to see, but it began the transformation of the United States from a plural arrangement, 13 separate independent nations, in effect, to one. The Constitution's express purpose is to establish a more perfect union, right? One of the express purposes. Okay? So it begins this process of this transformation. Under the Articles of Confederation, the United States were. Under the Constitution, the United States was, or is. See how important subject-verb agreement is? All of that nonsense your English professor was jabbering about was irrelevant. Think about the implications of the difference between those two. The United States are, or the United States is. Under the Articles of Confederation, the states got their authority from the people of the states, and they delegate, and they govern directly over the people of the state. Okay? And the states collectively delegate some authority to the central government, but the central government cannot exercise authority directly over the people. It can only exercise authority through the states, like raising revenue through the states, or militia through the states, or other items. Okay? So that's the Articles of Confederation, or the way a confederacy works. Under the Constitution, both the national government and the central government, or excuse me, the national government and the state governments, get their authority from the people. And both then exercise authority directly over the people. I think this is an interesting quote from Patrick Henry. Again, Patrick Henry was one of the leading anti-federalists. I told you at the start of our discussion today that Patrick Henry was one of the ones that never showed up at the Constitutional Convention because he smelt a rat. But he was a delegate to the Virginia Ratifying Convention. Remember, once the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention finished their work, they submitted it to the states. They submitted the finished Constitution to the states, and it had to be approved by at least 9 of the 13 states. And as I said, there was organized opposition in a lot of states, including Virginia. Look at Patrick Henry. What Patrick Henry says. I've just partitioned off this little quote here. He says, the question, he rises to the floor of the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He's recognized to speak. He says, the question turns, sir, on that poor little thing, the expression, we the people, instead of we the states of America. I need not take much pains to show that the principles of this system are extremely pernicious, impolitic, and dangerous. Patrick Henry and many of the Anti-Federalists were deeply offended by just those three little words, we the people of the United States. How dare they speak with the voice of the people? Because they understood the United States to be a union of states, not a union of people. I can't really overstate, it seems ridiculous perhaps to some of you in 2021, this far removed, but this was a huge change for the Anti-Federalists to accept. They understood exactly what it meant, that the United States was moving from a union of states to a union of people, and that would give the national government, that meant that the national government would then have authority directly over the people. And that's what they couldn't tolerate. All right. Whereas both levels of government derive their authority from the sovereign. What's the sovereign? The people, yes. More specifically, the Constitution. All right. Neither can unilaterally change the relationship. So that means that the national government can't modify or change the powers of the state governments. The state governments can't change or modify the powers of the national government. Can the powers of the national government be changed? For example, if among the enumerated powers of the national government, originally there was not a power to impose tax on personal incomes, but we now have the national government collecting a tax on your income, what must have happened? How did that come to be? The national government, thank you. An amendment was added to the Constitution, specifically the 16th Amendment in 1913, a little over 100 years ago, was added to the Constitution, giving Congress the power to impose a tax directly on you and me. So the powers of the national government can be changed, as this illustrates, but the national government can't do it by itself. How does an amendment work? Oh, Congress proposes the amendment by 2/3 vote of the House and Senate, and then it is submitted to the states for ratification, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. So it requires bilateral action, both national government and state governments, not unilateral action. Okay? Questions about that? Okay, last one on the list, the bullet list here. The regional governments, that means the states in the United States, exist in their own right. The regional governments, the states, exist in their own right. That means once the people of a state are admitted to the union of the people of the states, they can't be abolished or kicked out. It's not like they can say up there in Washington, okay, we've just about had it with you people down there in Texas. You're out. You're no longer part of the United States. They can't kick us out. It's a perpetual union. By the way, I should point out, because I know there's a lot of mythology that Texans hold about their state. The opposite side of the coin is true too. Once the people of a state are admitted to the union of a people of the states, as Texans were in 1845, they cannot secede on their own resolution. I know that many Texans want to dispute that. I've had students in my classes in the past who have disputed that. Texas is the only state that can secede if it wants to. We'll try, la la, la la. No, it can't. And by the way, we fought a whole war about that when Texas and other southern states attempted to secede from the Union. It had to be demonstrated by military conflict, a military conquest, where the armies of the United States defeated the Confederacy of the South, right? But Lincoln's argument was, even before the military engagement was determined, was final, Lincoln's argument had always been that the states can't secede. Now that argument was also sustained by the United States Supreme Court in a case involving the state of Texas just after the Civil War. And this is a terribly complicated case, so I'm not going to go into any detail, okay? I'm just going to say that the state of Texas was claiming in this case that contracts and obligations that it had entered into when it was a member of the Confederacy was not bound by the constitutional provisions for states honoring obligations and contracts. Hey, Texas says, those provisions of the Constitution can't apply to those contractual arrangements that we entered into because we weren't part of the United States at that time. The Supreme Court says to Texas in response, essentially says, oh, you may have thought you seceded, but you didn't actually secede. It's an interesting case. If you find any aspect of what we're discussing here interesting, maybe easy enough to find a Supreme Court case, primary sources and secondary sources in the age of the internet. Just go out and Google Texas versus White. It's complicated, but it's an interesting case. But I think that's the essence of the court's decision. Again, agreeing with Lincoln's argument that states can't secede, at least not on their own, not by themselves. Okay. Any questions about any of that? All right, so what we have then is you take all of these bullet points that we previously laid out, okay? Both the national government and the state governments derive their authority from the Constitution, and specifically, we want to understand some of this terminology that we're about to introduce, okay? So how does the Constitution divide? Look, if the basic definition of federalism, let me take this off so you don't get too busy writing, okay? The basic definition of federalism is a system of government in which powers are constitutionally divided between a central government and regional governments, okay? That's the basic definition of federalism, okay? So in the American federal system, how does the Constitution divide powers between the national government and the states? How does it do that, right? It delegates certain powers to the national government. We say that the national government is a government of delegated or enumerated powers. The theory then is that the national government, as Hamilton had argued, the theory is that the national government only has the powers that are delegated by the Constitution, no more. If it's not in the Constitution, it's not a power of the national government. And we'll look at the Constitution here in just a second and show you, tell you what, let's do that now, just so everybody can kind of get a sense of what I mean. Here you can see the transcription of the Constitution, okay? It begins, here's the preamble, and it begins Article 1 with Congress. Interesting that the article that deals with Congress comes first, right? Reflecting the view of the framers that Congress would be the predominant branch of government, right? all legislative powers herein granted, all legislative powers herein enumerated, all legislative powers herein delegated, okay, shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives, okay? If we scroll down to section 8, it begins the enumeration of powers to Congress. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. Number 1, Congress shall have the power to impose duties and imposts and excises. Congress shall have the power to pay the debts of the United States. Congress shall have the power to provide for the common defense of the United States. Congress shall have the power to provide for the general welfare of the United States. Congress shall have the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies. Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Congress shall have the power to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting, and so on, all the way down to the end of that section. Article 1, Section 8 contains the delegated powers of Congress, the enumerated powers of Congress. If Article 1 is the article that deals with Congress, which article do you think deals with the president, the executive branch? 2. Article 2. If we wanted to know what the delegated powers of the president are, we would go to Article 2. And they're kind of scattered about a little bit. It's not as convenient as Article 1, Section 8. Okay? And it really doesn't say much in Article 3 about the power of the court, except the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in a Supreme Court and other inferior courts, whatever the judicial power entails. It has to be determined. Okay? But you get the idea of what we mean by delegated or enumerated powers? They're listed here. And so the theory is, if it's not, see, nowhere in this list, okay, it's kind of a bullet point list, right? Nowhere in this list do you see the power of Congress to abridge the right of free speech. So Hamilton is saying, look, you don't see that in this list. So you don't need an amendment that says, or you don't need a Bill of Rights that says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It doesn't have that power in the first place. Okay? So that's the first thing. You understand this division of powers in our federal system to be accomplished by the Constitution delegating certain powers to the national government, particularly Congress. It reserves other powers to the states. So we say the state governments are governments of reserve powers. State governments are governments of reserved powers. So here's where we need to take a look at specifically the 10th Amendment, the Bill of Rights. Whose political philosophy did we say that the Bill of Rights reflects? Between, the original arguments between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? The Anti-Federalists, right? And I hinted that the real kicker was the 10th Amendment. Okay? The 10th Amendment is trying to, the Anti-Federalists believe that the bulk of the power should rest with the states. And they demand a Bill of Rights to limit the powers of the national government. And what became the 10th Amendment, what Jefferson called the bedrock of the Constitution, says the power is not delegated to the United States. You can substitute for United States national government. The power is not delegated to the national government by the Constitution, nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states, or reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Okay? That is the provision of the Constitution that the Anti-Federalists were hanging their hats on. Right? This Constitution that made them shudder because they believed that the framers of the Constitution, that the convention had gone too far in enhancing the powers of the national government they believed that this language would rein that power in by saying, if it's not a power that's delegated by the Constitution of the national government, it's a power that is reserved to the states. Okay? Now, there's a lot more to say about that. Okay? And that's what we'll do on Thursday. All right. Because it obviously hasn't worked out that way. Right? I mean, we know that the national government does a lot of things that's not in the Constitution. Right? They're debating right now up in Washington an increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour. We've had a minimum wage now going back to the 1940s, I think, right? But where does it say in the Constitution, in that list of powers that I showed you, where does it say in there that Congress has the power to establish a minimum wage in the first place? It's not in there. Where does it say in the Constitution that Congress can establish laws regulating the hunting of migratory geese? It's not in the Constitution. There's a lot of things that aren't in the Constitution that the national government exercises authority over. Okay, so that's where we'll go on Thursday.